Hello, and welcome to the Dr. Money Matters podcast, the show where we discuss important financial topics that were never covered in med school. I'm your host, Dr. Parag Butala. Welcome back to another episode of the Dr. Money Matters podcast. Today's episode is not as much financial, rather it's about achieving work-life balance and the struggles that many physicians, particularly dual physician families, face in respect to reaching this balance. My guests today are Dr. Nisha Mehta and Parag Butala, a physician couple from Charlotte, North Carolina. They're both specialists in demanding fields. Nisha is a radiologist and Parag is a plastic surgeon. Nisha blogs at her website, nishametamd.com, and she's given a lot of talks about physician burnout and wellness and trying to lead the life that you want to lead. So I thought she and Parag would be good guests today to talk about how they try to achieve this balance in their own lives. In this episode, we talk about how they balance their professional goals between these two high achievers. What did each of them give up, and how did they structure the life they want to lead? How did they structure their lives to get to the life they want to lead? How does their typical day go? The reality that you won't be able to be the best in all aspects of your life every day. We talk about Parag's bucket strategy. We talk about their hopes for their children and whether they would encourage them to go into medicine. We talk about Nisha's side gig and how that has grown, her side gig as a lecturer, and then also the physician side group that she manages on Facebook that has exploded. Up to 15 or 16,000 members at last check, and how that's altered her own work-life balance and how they have both had to frequently reassess their goals in order to keep going towards the direction they want to go to. I think it's very important for physicians and particularly dual physician families who are busy to take a step back and look at where they want to be in 5 or 10 years. Sometimes we get so caught up in our day-to-day activity, it becomes really hard to do that. But you really don't know where you're going if you're not looking further out. So I think Nisha and Parag are a good example of a couple who is doing that. And I hope that this podcast episode inspires you to do the same. So without further ado, Nisha Mehta and Parag Butala. Okay, welcome to another episode of the Dr. Money Matters podcast. My guests today are a married physician couple, Drs Nisha Mehta and Parag Butala out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Welcome, guys.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having us. We're excited to be here. It's really kind of an honor, and we've been following your podcast for a while, so it's really nice to be here.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Tarang. I'm glad we were able to connect, and like we said, we love your podcast, so we're excited to be on it.
Many of my listeners may have heard Nisha's voice on several other podcasts, my physician colleagues, such as Docs Outside of the Box, and I think Doctors Unbound. And so I wanted to have Nisha and Parag on because I think one of the issues that many physician families face, especially dual physician families, how do they balance their overall work and life situation? So I think you guys are a good example of a couple that can kind of just talk about those type of challenges that you face and see how the listeners kind of, have similar challenges and your guys' approach to this type of situation. So let's talk about that for you guys. Before we get into the exact part of the interview about that, I wanted to talk about why, your background. So just tell me a little bit about each of you, where you went to med school, what field you're in, and how you guys met.
Sure. So I guess I'll start. This is Parag's first podcast. So I'll help break the ice, I guess. Though he listens to podcasts all day, and actually he listens to them with twice the efficiency that I do. He
listen to them on 2X, right? Yeah, I love that.
Fantastic.
It's palpitation inducing. It is not good. I wake up every morning to him getting ready in the morning with it coming over our speakers in our house, and it really makes me just want to put a pillow over my head and stop. But yes, that's how he listens to them. So anyways, in terms of med school, residency, why medicine, my dad's a cardiologist. I really grew up admiring him and his career. And I dabbled in a few other things along the way, public policy, public health. I just kept coming back to medicine. I really think that it just really spoke to me and gave me a fulfillment that other things didn't. And so that's where I decided to go. I actually went to Brown for undergrad as part of their 8-year medical program originally. And that's where I met Parag. I'll let him tell the story of how we met because he usually makes it sound more interesting than I do. But, we were really good friends for a few years before starting to date during my junior year. We got married, I guess my last year of med school. Mm-hmm. And then we spent a few years in New York City. Med school I did at University of Pennsylvania. I actually ended up leaving Brown to be closer to my family. And so we did distance for the last 4 years while Parag stayed at Brown. And then we moved to New York, did residency in New York, Parag in general surgery at Sinai, in radiology at NYU. We had our first son my third year of residency. And then after we finished up residency, we moved down to North Carolina because Parag was doing a plastics fellowship at Duke. And I took on sort of a 3-year relationship with UNC where I did fellowship and then took an attending job there. And during that time, we had our second son. After Parag finished up with fellowship, we moved to Charlotte, which is where we are now. I'm a radiologist at the VA. Parag is in private practice plastic surgery down here. I guess that pretty much summarizes the last 20 years of our life in a nutshell. Parag, you have anything to add?
Well, pressure to tell a great story, I guess, on how we met. But I met Nisha her first day of her freshman year at Brown, and it was my first day of my sophomore year, and it's pretty nerdy. She was the pretty girl that was in genetics class a few rows behind me. And after that, we just sort of had a bunch of classes together, neuroscience classes, and we were even TAs together. So it was super nerdy. But it's a classic, science geeks meeting through college. We went on Nisha says we were hanging out. I think we were actually dating a lot.
We were definitely just hanging out.
Us dating. They were dates, but we spent a lot of time together, and eventually one thing led to another, and sort of we really began dating through med school, and we got married my intern year of my general surgery training, and I guess the rest is as Nisha said. For me, I am a plastic and reconstructive surgeon, and so in terms of what sort of drew me into plastic surgery is I and particularly after having done general surgery, I then went and did additional training in plastic surgery and sort of became dual board certified because I really enjoyed plastics, and what I like is I get to operate everywhere on the body, and the cases range from big to small to the tiniest things to super complex, and I kind of love that. And what I really enjoy in plastics is that it's the problems that are given to me are only limited. The solutions are only limited by my creativity and the kind of solutions that I can come up with. So I like that. And that's very different than what I was doing in general surgery.
Although he did take the longest possible route to get there.
I probably did.
10 years. Okay.
I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate to that pathway.
Right. It's the never ending training of a specialist. So awesome. So now you guys have been in Charlotte for how long?
This is our third year in Charlotte now.
Third year.
Yeah, we're 3 years in Charlotte. We did 3 years in the Research Triangle, living in Durham when I was at Duke, and Nisha was at Chapel Hill, and then now this is going in our third year in Charlotte.
Okay. And so since you've been in Charlotte, that's Nisha, you've been at the VA, and Parag, you've been in private practice?
That's right. So Nisha's at the VA, and I'm at a large, sort of a multidiscipline private practice that's composed of dermatologists, Mohs surgeons, and plastic surgeons.
Okay. So obviously you guys are both in time-consuming and difficult specialties. Particularly, I know a lot of people don't think radiology is, but Nisha can attest it is. So both of you working and having you have 2 boys, is that right?
Yes, we've got a 6-year-old, almost 7-year-old, and a 3-year-old, almost 4-year-old. Which they won't, they'll get mad if we say 6 and 3 by itself.
So you guys are, it's a typical situation where dual physicians, young children. So what are some of your, the daily challenges that you guys face?
I think for us, it's really figuring out what are our most important priorities professionally, and then finding ways for us to both have careers that we want without giving up the family life that we want. So early on, before kids, it was sort of very straightforward. It was all about trying to match the same location, getting our residencies in order, really sort of becoming and training to become the best physicians that we wanted to be, and then pursuing fellowship training. Kids kind of really, I think, complicated that matter for us because suddenly it's as attendings, we are a lot busier now in many ways than we were before. And so the difficulty is in time management and trying to negotiate between committee meetings, between soccer camp, soccer practices, even just little things like finding the time to go to the post office and drop off dry cleaning. I think it's kind of hard because when you're working 8 to 5 and then you got the kids right afterwards, where do you find that time of the day? And that's honestly, little things like that become quite a challenge for us.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a certain coming to terms with everything that each dual physician family has to do, and, or every physician family for that matter. But I think when I talk to members of dual physician couples, I think that the challenges that we're all facing are very similar in terms of just, what do you do when you have a sick kid and both of you can't call out sick? Or there's some things that I think are unique to dual physician couples that other families maybe don't have to think about in terms of both people having after hours responsibilities and things like that. And so I don't think that there's any cookie cutter solution, but I think for us, it's been really important to be open with each other about the things that we need to be happy professionally, and then also be willing to give up on some of the things that aren't as important to us. And during training, like Parag said, everything was really on autopilot and kids weren't involved. And I think we were able to do it really well. We had a few hiccups when it came to how do we get our training, like our residency, to end at the same time so we can move together for fellowship or things like that. And how do we make sure that we match in the same city? And, all of those things were a little bit tricky, but they weren't as complicated as after we had kids, where we've really had to sit down and reassess and see if this life that we talked about while we were dating in presumably what Parag says in college and then and med school is really like consistent with the life that we had actually wanted to create back then. And so, it's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day demands of work and kids. And I think it's really important for dual physician families to be constantly reassessing whether that daily life is in line with your goals. And so, examples of things like that, like when we were both taking call, we'd have to figure out, is it better to both take call the same weekend and have to have the kids potentially be with a neighbor or a babysitter for most of that weekend in case we both had to go in, but then have more family weekends together? Or do we want one of us to always be able to be with the kids, but have less weekends where we're all together? We found ourselves having a lot of those hard talks and saying, can we both really have careers when we come home exhausted every day? Or should one of us take a less demanding job? Or, hey, maybe both of us should be taking less demanding jobs and having more lifestyle oriented jobs. And those are the things that I think they're all doable, but you definitely have to figure them out.
What did you guys decide about the call weekend? Like for your situation, what did you guys do? Did you both take call the same weekend or?
So fortunately, I don't take call anymore. When we were both taking call, and that was one of the reasons why I found a job where I wouldn't have after hours work. But I think that when we were both taking call, we did try to group the call as much as we could so that we could get to more time together as a family, the four of us. But that led to sticky situations. Fortunately, we've had great neighbors. And I had one time where I had to go into the hospital in the middle of the night to do a pediatric joint aspiration. And Parag was in the hospital operating. And my neighbor was wonderful enough to come over at 2:00 in the morning and sleep in our house so that we didn't have to wake up the kids and they'd still be able to go to school the next morning. But, those are all things that we had to figure out. And I think ultimately we came to this decision that it wasn't worth it to have ourselves be juggling those situations all the time. And we really wanted to find jobs that didn't put us in that situation as much as we were finding ourselves in that situation in the past.
Right. And so you had mentioned, like, talking about this, trying to achieve this balance. Did one of you, and you kind of alluded to this, Nisha, that you decided to take a job where you would be doing less calls. So when you made that decision, was that a difficult thing for you to do in terms of, because you spend all this time, training and effort and becoming a radiologist, and how did you kind of come to terms with doing that? And was it a point where Parag was thinking kind of maybe he would do something similar?
It's almost flip-flop back and forth between us, I think.
Yeah. I guess I'll take the initial question, which is, on the surface, I do think that when I first took the VA job, a lot of people were really surprised because it was a big difference in sort of the career that I had been building before. In academics, I had grant funding. I was doing a lot of things that I really enjoyed academics, but I ultimately, this wasn't so much a decision that Parag and I made together as much as a decision that I really just felt like I was going on too many fronts and I really wanted more time with the kids. And when I took the job at the VA, that was really about getting my nights and my weekends and my holidays back, but also because I really actually do love the VA and I really do find that work fulfilling, but I love that it gives me better work-life balance. And so, I feel like I work with great colleagues. I get to do good patient care, but it's not the same environment as private practices in terms of coming home exhausted every day and worrying about call on the weekends and things like that. And I think one of the things that you have when you do have a dual physician family is you have a little bit more laxity on the how much do I need to bring in from a financial standpoint. And so I was willing to take that financial hit because it meant that I could live the life that I wanted outside. And Parag has always been really supportive. If I would have there was another job I was considering where I would have worked a lot harder. And he was completely supportive of me taking that. And we would have had to get a nanny and we would have had to probably figure out a way to outsource more things to make our lives work. But ultimately, it just wasn't the life that I wanted. And so we didn't do that at that time.
Yeah, I think it's been very fluid between us in many ways. And I think that's one of the important things that we have sort of had to come to a decision with as a couple, both working. So if you look at sort of when I was in training and Nisha was on staff at UNC, I was phenomenally busy, really not around a whole lot. And Nisha was sort of juggling multiple things at the same time. And that's untenable going forward that way. And then as both being attendings, now that Nisha's actually sort of becoming busier with physician side gigs and things like that, it's sort of almost a little bit of a reversal where what I've done is compact as much of my life as I can sort of between the hours of 8 and 5 and really reduce that spillover of work that is so easy to spill over after 5 p.m. and say, oh, let me just stay a little longer and work on these notes or stay a little bit longer and get this done. Or part of my issue actually is I still have a little bit of a general surgery mentality, and I'll say, oh, let's just there's this case that I can do in the OR. Should I put that off as an elective case to do in 2 days, or can I just add it on 5 p.m. add it on to my OR schedule? And Nisha's very quick to remind me that that's something you really can put off for 2 days. You can do that.
I may send him not so subtle text messages with like cute pictures of the kids being like, oh, I would really love to see you actually tonight. Or I've had this great day at school and he's waiting to tell you about something. And so...
But that's required us to be quite fluid and really sort of compact as much as possible. And on my end, compact as much as possible before 5 p.m. so that when I do get home, we're really spending time with our family and with the kids. And that's been a big change, I think, for us in the last couple of years.
So that's good. That now, Parag, your practice, in plastic reconstructive surgery has allowed you to do that. A lot of, like you said, general surgeons. Are you taking call at all, or?
I am. I take about a week of call a month.
Okay. And is that call, a pretty demanding type of call, or is it?
It's sort of variable. It's, honestly, it's kind of variable. It's at a level 2, level 3 trauma center. So while I don't have hand replants anymore, things like that, which I think I do not miss too much doing that. At the same time, there are but at the same time, there are a fair number of sort of bread and butter things that I get, tons of dog bites, facial lacerations, things like that. And that kind of draws you in. But there's also a lot more flexibility in being able to kind of manage that so that not everything needs to be done emergently, middle of the night. So it is a little bit different for me than it was, particularly in general surgery and particularly during my fellowship training as well. So I really enjoy having that little bit of flexibility that my call has afforded me.
I think while Parag takes a lot of calls still, I think a good way to exemplify the difference between what he was doing before and now is before, when he was on call, it was on our calendar and I would know that I would not see him for 24 hours.
That's right.
And, now I don't even know when he's on call half the time. And then he'll get a phone call and I'll be like, oh, are you on call? Because it doesn't intrude in our lives to the degree that it used to. And so, yes, it's still there as a presence, but there's very little that draws him into the hospital. And therefore, it doesn't make much of an impact on, what we can do in the evenings anymore, or whether I can commit to being able to go to dinner with friends because he can be on call and still go to dinner, because there's not as much in the way of emergencies, which I think has been a big difference for us.
But that's been sort of a conscious decision on our part to pursue jobs that did not have the same coverage at a level 1 trauma center where I would be on call for hand and facial trauma and so forth, and pan-facial smashes and all of that. So that was also a very conscious decision on our part to pursue that for the lifestyle trade-off.
Yeah, certainly has a lot of friends who he did training with who are still doing a lot of very high acuity plastic surgery. And every time we hear about those cases, I sort of sigh a little, and I'm glad that we did what we did, because, being able to take back those hours at the end of the day and make those ours has been really key for us in terms of our own happiness, I think.
Right. I think that's a good point, is that you guys, both individually and as a couple, have kind of made that conscious decision and to kind of structure your life the way you want it. And I think that right there is one of the key things that a lot of physicians are having a hard time doing, but it is doable, and it doesn't matter what field you are in. I mean, obviously certain fields lend themselves to a little bit more of this than others. I think it's something that would help physicians just kind of, instead of just constantly doing the things that they're continuously do, if they step back for a moment and just try to figure these things out, answer the bigger questions in their lives, it may help them kind of guide themselves towards the ultimate goal of where they're trying to reach. So I think that what you guys have just described is a great example of how it's possible to do that. So, this kind of goes along with that question, but do you think men and women in medicine, is it possible to have it all in terms of, family, work, or is it kind of more like what you guys are talking about, where you have to, assess in each side of the equation, you're going to have to make some trade-offs?
I would say that it's definitely possible to have the things that matter to you the most, but you have to decide what those things are. So this is something that I feel very strongly about in terms of saying, well, on any given day, you can't be the best mother, the best at your job, and the best wife, and the best in terms of taking care of your health, and the best in terms of being a really great friend. Like, you can't say in one day, I'm going to work a full day. I'm going to come home and do Pinterest activities with my child. I'm going to make a fresh cooked meal. We're going to all sit down and have this great 3-course meal. And then I'm going to go out for girls' night. And by the way, at 6 a.m. before work started, I also went to the gym for an hour. Like, there's only so much you can fit into a day. And so I think that I'm a big fan of the idea that you can have everything, but you have to figure out on any given day what your priority is going to be. And also, in the large scheme of things, you have to figure out what things really, really matter to you. And so I know that it took me a long time to get past the working mom guilt. And I think for everyone, the working parent guilt, regardless of your gender, in terms of expecting to, work full time and somehow make it to every activity at school. And I would feel really bad about that. But now I've started to realize that that's just maybe one thing that's not compatible with everything else that I'm doing. And so I try to make it to school whenever I can. And it's a total bonus when I'm able to do it. But if I can't make it to every single thing, it's okay. And really getting over that guilt and saying that as long as I make the most of the things that I'm prioritizing the most at that given moment, then I can be really happy and just focus on that and be grateful for that, and then not sweat the smaller stuff as much. So I do think that you can, quote unquote, have it all, but you can't have it all in one given day or one given moment. And you do have to kind of shift your life, and at different stages in your life, you've got to shift those priorities around so that you're really getting the most bang for your buck on every end of things. And so that's what I think. Parag?
I think it's a constant struggle. I think for particularly dual physician families, our two motivated couples, this is a constant struggle, and we don't have all the answers to it. But I kind of look at it as there are buckets in my life. That there's the professional bucket, there's the personal sort of wellness fitness bucket, the social friends circle kind of bucket, family bucket, and I can't possibly maximize everything on every single front at all times. So then what am I willing to say no to? What am I willing to sort of cut down on? And I think the ability to say no to things is something that personally I have a very hard time doing, but I'm learning to do that. And I have to prioritize that. So I say no to the being on a national committee for the American Society of Plastic Surgeons, for example, but then that allows me time in the evening to spend more time with my family, or that way I can actually get to the gym during a certain time. That allows me to prioritize things. At the same token, you can't sort of maximize your your social bucket in terms of watching basketball with your friends on every single weekend, and then you're not going to be there for your kids to take them to soccer or that kind of idea. So for me, it's been the ability to say no and to backtrack a little bit, even though I really have a hard time doing that.
I think it's tough, like you said, because most, especially dual physician couples, they've spent so many years, you had to say yes to study hard. You had to, work extra hard in residency. You had to do all these things. And that's a very good point you bring up, Parag, that, it's one of those things that unfortunately, mostly because you're on a certain track, you don't develop that skill until you're no longer on that track and you have these independent decisions. So as you said, you become an attending, you can kind of make some conscious choices. But for most people, you've been doing this for so long, it's very hard to get off that track. So I think it's very self-aware of you guys to kind of figure that out pretty early, I would say, in your careers and come together as a couple to kind of make those decisions. I think that's something that's very tough for a lot of people to do. So, I encourage it. And by the way, Parag, I like the idea of the bucket strategy. That's a very good financial strategy as well. So we won't get into that part of it yet. So, so just take us through a daily, a typical like Tuesday for you guys. How do you guys kind of organize your life so that it's the most efficient and you're able to hit as many of these buckets, like you're saying, as possible?
Yeah, it's and I'm a big fan of this whole bucket type approach. As my day is extremely regimented, so it's the surgeon in me totally comes out on that, which I'm sure the family really appreciates. But
we see its value. We may not always appreciate it, but we see its value.
On a typical day, I'm usually the first one up, and get breakfast.
You are the surgeon, after all. You have to be the first one up.
Exactly right, and I kind of live up to that stereotype. And I get the kids breakfast and lunch ready and sort of get all that going, while Nisha then gets them ready, getting their clothes ready, brushing their teeth, getting them downstairs. We sort of do a divide and conquer in terms of dropping off the kids. Nisha takes our older one to school, and I drop off the younger one at daycare. And she's usually done before I am at the end of the day, and so she picks them up. And it's very much of a team approach when we get home for sort of getting all of our work done at the end of the day. During the day itself, I'm kind of a big proponent of sort of maximizing every minute that you have free. And so I really sort of take the approach of every minute during lunch, my staff jokes around. They don't know when I eat, but it's literally like if I have 40 minutes free right in the middle of the day, I'm going to be going out for a run, because that way I get that done. And then I don't have to worry about working out later on in the evening or at nighttime or that sort of thing. So I try to, between the hours of 8 and 5, really very, very tightly control that, so that is as regimented as possible for me. And what that allows me to do is that in the evenings, I come home and I'm not as much thinking about work, but it's more so we're thinking about us as a family. And so we'll cook together, or we do a divide and conquer, and one person will help the kids with homework and the other person will do the cooking. And that's kind of a very fluid, flexible kind of way that Nisha and I approach that. But that's kind of how our day works.
Yeah. And I think it's important also when you talk about the dual physician family to also talk about the kids. And that's something that Parag and I always try to place an emphasis on and acknowledge the fact that when we're working these hours, it also means the kids are working those hours, right? Because they're also in school during those hours. They're at aftercare and they're at extended day and all these things in their school situations too. So when we come back at the end of the day, it's not just the two of us that are tired, it's the two of them that are tired as well. And so really, how do we bring that into a way that allows everybody to tone down? So, by having that structure, as much as Parag is right that he runs it very, very tight, it works out very nicely for us, because that means at 6:30, everything's pretty wrapped up. And then we go upstairs, we go to the playroom, we'll play board games, we'll, do activities with the kids, whatever it is that we want to do. And we've got that 45 minutes or so before showers and bedtime routine and everything to really tone down as a family and kind of get the best part of our day in right then. And so that the kids get that. And then usually by 8:39, they're asleep. And that's, I think, when the structure to our day kind of goes out the door, and Parag and I are able to say, okay, well, tonight, is this a night that we're both going to be working on some deadlines that we have? Or is this a day that we get out a bottle of wine at 9 o'clock and just sit back and relax and, watch a movie or whatever? And that's probably the only part of our work week that's not routine. That 9 to 11, 9 to midnight sort of gap. where we have a little bit more flexibility. But other than that, it does seem like we're on autopilot for most of the day.
Well, I mean, I think that's good though, because like you say, the regiment part of it at least kind of takes some of the thinking out of it. You just do it, and it's much more efficient that way. So I think that's a great approach to doing things. And you still do have the free time, like you said, in the evening once things are kind of winding down to kind of, do more family time or personal time or whatever you want to do. So, you were talking about the children. This is a big debate. And I remember, my father's a physician as well, like you were saying, Nisha. That generation, always was encouraging, particularly as most of my Indian listeners remember, you were pretty much going to be an engineer, a doctor, maybe a lawyer. But now, it's a little bit more, people are trying to branch outside of those typical professions. And so, having said that, would you encourage your children to go into medicine?
Definitely, yes, absolutely. I might be overly enthusiastic.
It's pretty enthusiastic, Parag. I haven't heard that level of enthusiasm in a while, so that's good.
But I mean, at the same time, I love what I do. I mean, I beam with enthusiasm about it. I can't imagine doing anything else, and I may be a little bit unique in that perspective.
Well, Parag loves the OR. He's always loved the OR, and that's great. I think there's a lot to be said for following your passion.
But I think despite the talk of burnout, the salary changes, changes in work requirements, the administrative workload, it's still, when I look at what I do, I love it. What else can I say that in the same day you can have a facelift, a complex reconstruction, followed by a skin cancer surgery, all in one day. And I think what you have to say to yourself, though, is there is still the ability to develop flexibility within your field so long as you make that conscious decision to do it. That's something that I probably can't overemphasize. And it kind of still ties back into that ability to say no to certain things. You have to know what is it that you get value out of doing and what is it that you don't. And by taking advantage of that and spinning that towards your own life, I think there's a lot of value and fun in doing what you do.
Yeah, I'm less enthusiastic in my response, but I do love medicine. And if the kids were to pick it by themselves, I would absolutely 100% be supportive. I don't necessarily know that I would go so far as to push the kids into medicine and buy them their first stethoscope set and all of that stuff right from this age. But, fortunately, our kids are still really young. And I think that there's a lot going on in the medicine these days, and the landscape of medicine is changing. Healthcare is just changing so dramatically right now. So hopefully by the time the kids have to make that decision, market forces and changing culture will have addressed some of the problems that we're having in the profession these days. And I'll have a little bit less hesitation. Like I said, I don't think that I could be happier in another job doing the heart of what I do. And I really enjoy the heart of what I do. And I think that part is really, really fulfilling. Now, I obviously have a skewed perspective because I talk to a lot of physicians about burnout, and I talk to a lot of physicians about their struggles in the field. And so, I look at that percentage of physicians facing burnout, and that I don't want for the kids, right? But if I'm able to encourage them to create the life in medicine that they want, the same way that I'm encouraging other people to create that life, and if they're able to do that, then absolutely, I would agree with Parag, and I would encourage them to go into medicine. I think that we just really have to work really hard to create that field for our kids.
Right. And I think that's a good answer, because I think you're right. We are going through this transition now, and that probably, there's always been a transition to a certain degree, but I think as overall profession, physicians are now becoming a little bit more self-aware of these issues, and I think are, probably in the last 10 years are much more inclined to make these changes rather than just kind of accept that this is what's going to happen. So I think that's a very encouraging sign. And, I think that the challenges that you guys face in your own personal life is kind of what, in terms of addressing certain things and picking what's important to you, is what physicians in general are kind of trying to do now. So I think it does bode well for medicine in the future. And there's always going to be pros and cons and things like that. But I think overall, I think it's still a good field. And I think, medicine is still a great field for people to go into. So I'm glad to hear the enthusiasm that you guys have.
So self-awareness is a great way of describing it, honestly, because if you don't have that, and if you don't have that ability to sort of say, do I love what I'm doing? Do I enjoy it? And am I able to mold it into the kind of lifestyle that I want for myself and the balance in my life that I want for myself? Then you're just going to sort of be on a train track, kind of on a track going forward without really having control over the process. So I think you're absolutely right in saying self-awareness is that's the best description for it.
Right. Well, yeah. And like I said, I think it's an encouraging sign for, medicine in general that so many of us are now trying to address some of these issues. So I know Nisha gives talks around the country now about burnout. So, and I think more and more of us are becoming, attuned to these things, and hospitals and employers in general are starting to make that shift. So better times are ahead. Let's talk a little bit about your guys' goals for your family in the future. What do you guys 5 years out, 10 years out? Where do you see your some professional goals, but just kind of as a family too? What do you guys want to do?
Yeah, this is something that we've been talking about a lot lately, really, because, as I get busier on the stuff that I'm doing outside of my day job, we've really had to come to assessing, well, what are we aiming towards, and where is it worth it to put our efforts? And I think the big things that we're realizing is, number one, we really have to be able to always emphasize quality over quantity, and always be able to, we want to make sure that as the kids get busier with their things and we get busier with our things, now all of a sudden, it used to be that on the weekends, the kids just wanted to play with us and do, spend time with us. And now all of a sudden it's, oh, can we have a play date with so-and-so? And, oh, we want to join this team, or we want to join this activity. And so I think as all four of us have our own individual goals, really trying to make sure that we're going forward with all of them as a unit, as opposed to sort of marching separately in those regards. And so that, I think, in terms of the 5-year plan, is really, how do we allow like the little guys to become the people that they want to be within the context of what we want as a family, and trying to figure out where we set boundaries, where we put our time when we have spare time. How do we do things like travel more and the things that we really love, while not compromising progress on other fronts? And so that's the short term, from now to 5-year challenge. Is how do we create those lives, doing the things that have recently been more inspiring to us? And for Parag, how does he grow his practice in a way that he's happy with? You could speak to that yourself, but
I can talk on end for my practice and what I do. But I think our the short-term and long-term plans are really particularly geared, as Nisha said, sort of around our family and what do we want for our children, and what is best for them. And then we sort of take the rest of our lives accordingly for that.
Yeah. And I think actually, like, we've also been putting a lot of time into thinking about what we need from each other too, and not just making it just about the kids. And I think that that's something that, we realized early on when Parag was in fellowship, where we put so much emphasis on what we needed for the kids, that we sort of started to feel like we were losing a part of what we were as a couple, because Parag was so busy working that every time he stepped foot in the house, I really wanted to like throw him at the kids so that they knew who their dad was, you know? And then that meant that he and I weren't really getting a whole lot of time to connect on a different front. And so now, for example, one thing that we've incorporated into our day is every day while we're driving to work, so he does his respective drop off, I do my drop off, and then we've both got about 30 minutes where we're in the car. And so we have a phone date every morning. And that's a really great time for us to, like, without the kids in the picture, without us being tired, without any of those other things, just dedicated time to sit and say, well, what's going right? What's going wrong? Or just talk about a podcast that we listen to, or talk about something that we were planning for the weekend. But that's a really good time for us to connect every morning, kind of without interruptions. And finding those sorts of pockets as a couple also to make sure that we're kind of moving forward in ways that we're both happy with. Because I'll have all these meetings related to stuff that I'm doing on the side. And then I'll realize when we have our friends over and somebody's asking me about them, I'm like, oh, Parag, I never told you about that, And so, like, how do we make sure that we're marching together, like, forward together also, and running things by each other? And so those are challenges that we're facing. But I think that hopefully we're doing the right way.
No, I think that's great because whether it's just communication, whether it's in person or whether it's on the phone, however you do it, as long as you're able to talk to each other daily and kind of keep each other in the because you're right, everyone can kind of get so wrapped up in the kid stuff that it kind of can take away a little bit from you got work, you got kids. Obviously, you married each other. You're the couple, and when the kids move away, you're still going to be together. It's very important, and I don't think a lot of people take enough time to address those things. So anything that you do that improves communication, obviously, is a good thing. Now, that being said, this is not a marriage advice podcast or anything like that. So I'm not going to go too much into that. But so now, Nisha, you obviously you were talking about the side things, and you created that physician side gigs group. Was it about 2 years ago? And it's turned really into this massive thing. So tell me a little bit about that. And then as it's grown, how has it impacted your own work-life balance?
So physician side gigs, started out as a Facebook group, started out small, as really just a way to, I was doing a little bit of stuff on the side and I wanted advice and I wanted people to ask questions from. And I think physicians trust physicians, and I wanted other physicians to kind of run those things by and make sure that I was doing them in the right way. And I was able to ask the questions that I needed to ask in terms of the questions that other people maybe couldn't answer for me because they didn't understand what it was like to be a physician or to have the concerns that we do in terms of asset protection or liability or any of those things. And so it started out really small and stayed pretty small for a while. And then really in the last year, we've now grown to 13,000 members. And I think 12,000 of that was really in the last year. So it's really growing really rapidly. And I think that that's exciting because I think it's exciting what it says about the future of medicine. I think it's really great that physicians are looking at all these areas that are related to healthcare and saying, well, how do we make sure that we have a say in all of these realms as well? And where do we take back a little bit of our lives in medicine, and just who are we as people and what drives us, and how can we make sure that we focus on those things as well? And so everybody's reasons for being involved in the group are very different. Some people are trying to pay off loans. Some people have something that they've always wanted to try and just want to try it. And other people want to be able to give themselves a little bit of flexibility or create passive income streams so that if the hospital does come to them and say, hey, we got bought out, and by the way, we're cutting your salary by 50%, you have the ability to say, okay, well, let me think about that because I have some side income. I have some time to figure out a solution that works best for me and not just feel handcuffed to the job that you're in. So I think there's a lot of reasons why people have been really excited about it. And I think the more people that I meet and the more things that I see that they're doing, the more excited that I get about it. And the more potential, all these conversations just lead to more ideas. And so really for me, the challenge has been, okay, I have all these ideas and people are bringing great ideas to me all the time. And it's how do you move forward with those things? One, in a way that doesn't take over the rest of your life. And two, in a way that's productive and uses actual tried and true methods and not just me sort of shooting off the cuff, which I think at the beginning, that's kind of what it was. And now I've become a lot more purposeful in how I approach things just because of time limitations. And so I think that in terms of my own work-life balance, I will admit it is off kilter right now. And that's really been over the last month or two. We've realized that before we were really, really strict about not letting anything we were doing on the side, either one of us, really spill over into home life. And now it's becoming harder and harder to not take that phone call or say, actually, I'm not available from this time to this time. And it's quick. You have to resist the temptation to say, okay, let me just finish this up really quick because it's never really quick.
Right.
And so those are the things that I struggle with now in terms of really wanting to devote a lot of time to this thing that I'm very, very passionate about, and seeing an opportunity where other people are asking me for help and being able to provide that help and wanting to give that help, but then also keeping in mind that my kids also need me, and I also need time with my kids for my own sanity, and I need time with my family for my own sanity, and really trying to figure out where I put those boundaries up and how to go forward. And I think that's, now I'll take an occasional day off from work to just have a day to breathe, which is something that I've never done before. And so now that's kind of nice. And my boss has been really supportive about saying, okay, well, like if we're not short staffed on this day and you want to take a day off in the middle of the week, go ahead and take a day in the middle of the week and reconnect. And that's great for me because if I need to, go to Target without 2 kids in tow, that's much more efficient. And I could take some phone calls during working hours and, all of those sorts of things. And so all in all, I think it's been an interesting bit. And as Parag alluded to earlier, we've certainly had to restructure some things because of that. Parag has taken on a little bit more of the mental load when it comes on to certain things. I've always traditionally planned all of our vacations because I've always had more time. And for the first time, Parag has planned our spring break vacation. So I'm interested to see how it goes, but I'm just going to kind of, right. I'm going to jump on the plane and see what happens.
That's good.
A hoteler. But, one thing we've tried to do as a couple with regards to that has been to maintain a level of communication with setting what are the absolute things that we have to get done that are necessary, and then sort of trying to structure everything else with that as well. So, for example, if Nisha has a talk that she needs to get done, or if I have an IRB that I'm reviewing, we set aside that time saying, hey, look, this is what I need to do at this time. But then the other person will then go ahead and take care of the other things that that other laundry list of activities that you need to get done, whether it's taking the kids on their play date or whether
getting them haircuts.
The
kids never get haircuts.
Right. they're going with the surfer shaggy look right now. Right. But the idea is that we've tried to, as things with Nisha, for example, have gotten busier, she and I have tried to communicate back and forth what are the other things that need to do, and I've adapted my own work and life to sort of try to make that happen. And that's obviously it's constantly a struggle, but that's, even those, that 7:30 morning communication date, that 30-minute thing, that's what all that's about, is even set an agenda for even that whole week and saying, hey, look, these are the things that we have to get done. How do we go about doing that?
Right. And again, like you said, communication, I mean, it's just critical in all respects. But obviously, between spouses, it's the number one thing. And I think we sometimes tend to lose sight of that because people tend to, it's just part of the daily routine. You just kind of do the things. But again, this is not a marriage advice thing. So, so now you guys, let's talk about this part, because this is a financial podcast, and you guys are, dual income physicians in both relatively highly, reimbursed specialties. Any, goals, advice that you have for physician colleagues, and particularly a lot of the, dual physician families, like I think Nisha had alluded to earlier, you have a little bit more freedom in terms of, or less pressures in terms of the, individual person to make a certain amount of income or something like that. But there's different challenges that you guys, may have than other maybe single physician families, or just single breadwinner families. So any advice, any challenges that you guys face that, maybe more unique to dual physician families?
I mean, even though it's a financial podcast, I think we are far from financial gurus, but we do a lot of the things that I think probably most people should do, or should definitely be doing if you're not already. And some of it's some of the things that you've actually talked about in your podcasts, in other podcasts, but it's things that you have to do for sure. Almost go without saying is maximize your pre-retirement or your tax-deferred savings, and maximize your 401k. Start that 529 for your kid. It turns out it's insanely easy to start a 529. And until I opened one up, I didn't realize how incredibly easy it was. Those things are absolutely essential. Disability insurance, get that. Don't hesitate. Get that before you're out of training. That's another no-brainer. Life insurance, there's a back and forth between term and whole life insurance. I can tell you what we did for us is we sort of just looked at what are our liabilities, and then went with a practical term life insurance that covered those liabilities.
Oh, that's a good answer. Good answer.
So that was, it's a sort of a practical solution.
Right.
And liabilities will decrease over time as we do things like pay off our mortgage. And so we went with a life insurance policy that is not as substantial 20 years from now as it is right now. And so there's sort of a very practical approach to it. The other thing that we try to do, and this is almost a no-brainer, but it kind of has to be said because I don't think people follow it as much, is when you are an attending and when you do start that your actual physician salary and so forth, you got to still live like a resident to a certain extent, and we try to do that as well. And I think people talk about it. It's easier to talk about it than to do it. but it's essential to try to build some savings. Then the question becomes, with that savings, what do you do? And this is an area in which we struggle as well. We look for all kinds of areas to invest in, from real estate opportunities, really sort of being our primary thing, to sort of, I don't know, developing our own side gig, I suppose, with physician side gig.
There you go.
And I think, along with the lines of Parag was saying in terms of living like a resident, I think that speaks to sort of the bigger picture analysis of sort of where we feel like we should be, which is if we have two relatively good salaries, how do we take advantage of that in a way that allows us to create the life that we want? So is it that we need to hit financial independence as soon as possible so that we can really work on our terms and be able to make the decisions that we want? Yes, absolutely. I think that that's definitely a huge impetus behind some of the financial decisions that we make. But it's also really looking at that and saying, okay, well, if we do all these things right, if we put the money into retirement that we should, and if we put the money into 529s that we should, and we have the salaries that we do and the pension plans that we do and all of these things that we do, we really should be able to be comfortable. And at that point, it's really a question of how much more do you need and what are you giving up to get that, right? So you could always have more money. And I think that that's one thing that's the part where it's actually hard to get out of the resident mentality because, for the longest time, Parag and I would walk instead of taking the subway because we didn't want to spend the $2 on the subway ride in New York, and to get out of that mentality and say, okay, well, where can we create value from our money? And where is it worth spending that extra money? And where is it not worth spending that extra money or worth chasing that extra money? So that's come up with us in terms of things like decisions related to call, like we'd sort of alluded to earlier. So if you can make a certain amount of money extra by taking call at another hospital, but if that's going to mean that you can't go on vacation because you're on call more frequently, or you have to check with that schedule all the time, and make sure that you're free to be able to go out to dinner when you want to go out to dinner, or is there something that has a higher likelihood of drawing you into work, then are those things that you want to do for whatever benefit that they have? And in some cases, the answer is yes. And in some cases, the answer is no, that's really not worth it. This amount of money is not going to make a difference in our long-term financial future. And really, we need to be enjoying the life that we're having right now and not adding more onto it. And so I think that that's something that is really hard for physician families to do because it takes some time to actually take a break and look at what your money is now and to really do a comprehensive financial plan and look at where you're going, what you can expect in the future, and, what things are reliable, what things are X factors, and come to a point where you say, this is what we need to be happy and comfortable and secure financially. And this is what we need that we're doing just because we love it. And hey, if it brings in money, that's great. And this is what we need in terms of our lives outside of medicine. And how do we bring all those things together to really create the life in medicine that we want? Because we have the luxury of being able to do that. So now how do we do it?
Right.
That's really what I like Parag said, we're not financial gurus on the logistics of doing some of these things. But when I talk about finances to other people, that's really what I think in terms of physician finances that people really need to be keeping a bigger eye on. It's not just how do you earn more money, and this comes up a lot in terms of physician side gigs. It's not about just having more money. It's about being able to use that money as a way to create the life that you want. And where does that all shake out? And I think that's maybe something that's not emphasized enough right now in the physician finance world. I think it's certainly something that people are starting to talk about more.
Right.
And I'm really encouraged by the people who are talking about things like that, and really amazed by the people who are actually doing things like that in terms of retiring early, or, I look at the older generation of physicians who's working until they're 72, 73, whenever, and you kind of wonder, have they really stepped back and done that analysis? And maybe for some people that's what they want, and that's great. And for other people, I kind of wonder if they're just doing it because that's what they've always done. And so what I like to encourage people to do is really step back and do kind of what you said. Where do you picture your life in 5 years? Where do you picture your life in 10 years? And are you going to get there by making the financial decisions that you're making?
I think that's a great answer. And I think that, more and more of us are realizing that, money is yes, money's great. We would all like more money, but there's choices involved, like you said, and money ultimately is just a tool. and you use money to get where you want to go, or hopefully you use money to help you get where you want to go. So I think those are, that's a very good answer. And I think that hopefully, with this podcast and others like it, side gigs, all those, the different physician Facebook groups, I think that, if we can all kind of try to get this message along to each other, I am very encouraged by, the developments in medicine for our future by people like you, Nisha, and, like the other bloggers and podcasters and stuff like that. So we're all kind of struggling in this together, and we're all trying to, get to the certain destinations and choices that we're making. And, it's great that people are able to connect with each other now a little bit easier with these various social media avenues. So, I want to kind of wrap things up here, and I want to thank both of you for participating in this podcast. I want to encourage the listeners to check out Nisha's blog. Nisha, can you tell us where to visit your blog?
Oh, yeah, sure. So it's just www.nishamehtamd.com. So that's NishaMehtamd.com. And that links to basically all of my other social media sites in terms of my Twitter and my Instagram and my Facebook groups and things like that. So that's a good place to start if you want to find me.
Awesome. Well, hey, I want to thank you guys. Great podcast. I think, a lot of people will hopefully get some things out of it. And I just think that we, self-awareness, self-analysis about these type of issues is something that's only good for all of us. So I want to thank both of you. Parag, thank you for participating in your first podcast. You've got a good, smooth radio voice. So I don't think this will be your last one. Okay, thanks for joining us for another episode of the Dr. Money Matters podcast. I want to thank Nisha and Parag for joining me today, and I hope they inspired you to try to prioritize and point your life in such a way that you can achieve the optimal balance for you. Nisha writes about many of these topics on her blog, nishamehtamd.com. And I'll put a link on the show notes. And I'm sure many of you are already members of the Physician Side Gigs group. And if not, I encourage you to join on Facebook. Also, please join the Dr. Money Matters Facebook group, where we discuss some of the topics on this show and many of our previous shows. I encourage you to follow me on Twitter at Dr. Money Matters. And you can find the podcast, and please share it with your friends on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, etc. We have the episodes now on YouTube also, and Facebook video as well. Although I haven't actually, it's just audio format, but it's on. You can play the episodes on Facebook. And again, please leave us positive reviews. I noticed a bunch of you have left reviews in the last few weeks. I appreciate that. The more positive reviews you can do for this podcast and for the other physician podcasts I've mentioned before, it helps us move up the Apple Podcast rankings. So thank you very much. And once again, I encourage you to listen to some of my other physician colleagues, Docs Outside the Box, The Hippocratic Hustle, The Happy Doc, Doctors Unbound, A White Coat Investor. And there are now many more out there. And I'll put a link on my show notes as to the other physician podcasts as well. So I encourage you to take a listen. Physicians are doing some great things in the podcasting world. And with that, please join us again next time for another episode of the Dr. Money Matters podcast. Also, sign up for our email list on my website, and you'll be notified by email when the new podcast is out. And